It's been over 35 years since British animation company Aardman Animation first introduced us to Wallace and Gromit. This pair was first introduced in a series of short films featuring eccentric and passionate but sometimes clueless cheese-loving inventor Wallace and his somewhat smarter but silent dog best friend Gromit. The pair first debuted in 3 short films, all of which were major successes, even spawning a follow-up short film and a feature film, Curse of the Were-Rabbit, which won an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, and recently spawned a follow-up, Vengeance Most Fowl, just released on Netflix. In celebration of Wallace and Gromit's return, I'm looking back on the 4 classic Wallace and Gromit short films, starting with number 1, A Grand Day Out. While on bank holiday, a type of day off in the UK, Wallace struggles to decide where to take Gromit before ultimately deciding to have tea and crackers at home. But the only thing missing is cheese. And everything else in the refrigerator. While snacking away on crackers, and also annoying Gromit while he's reading, man, this dog's got talent, Wallace decides to take Gromit somewhere involving cheese, looking in his magazine on the subject for any possible destinations. Just then, both Wallace and Gromit realize that the moon is made out of cheese, which I don't think is true, and right away, Wallace heads to the basement to start the first designs for a rocket. Not a bad drawing of him and Gromit, though. Using whatever he can find, with a little help from a somewhat annoyed Gromit, the pair complete their rocket. And I have to admit, it looks pretty good considering that it was mostly made out of wood. Now you might be wondering, can it actually fly? Not just to the moon, but at all. Well, after Wallace and Gromit run a few tests, Wallace lights a match and lights a rope in a similar way that you would with twine attached to sticks of dynamite. Kind of like the classic Looney Tunes shorts. Gromit sets the timer before blastoff and opens the roof, preparing for launch. How much time did they spend on this rocket? Just then, Wallace realizes that he forgot the crackers. In a hurry, Wallace races back to the kitchen cupboard, grabbing all of the crackers he can get his hands on, while Gromit waits impatiently. Just before blastoff, Wallace returns with his hands full of crackers, making it back to the rocket just in time. So it actually does work. The rocket successfully leaves Earth while Wallace and Gromit just go about their business, with Wallace reading a newspaper, and Gromit making a tower out of cards, which collapses just before the rocket lands. After a successful landing on the moon, Wallace and Gromit set up for a picnic. But after cutting a piece of the moon and tasting it, Wallace tries to figure out what type of cheese it's made of, but can't identify the taste. What can I say, the man loves his cheese. I know that this is a cartoon, but in all seriousness, if he really did eat a piece of the moon, he'd probably need to call his dentist. The pair decide to set up camp somewhere else until they come across a mysterious coin-operated robot. Wallace inserts a coin into its slot, but nothing happens. Wallace tries to get it to work, but accidentally pulls off one of its buttons, although he successfully reattaches it. Realizing that it's no good, Wallace and Gromit take off just as the robot suddenly comes to life and notices that the pair left their picnic behind. The robot makes its way to the picnic area to clean up after Wallace and Gromit, but becomes really interested in a skiing magazine that they left behind. The robot pictures itself skiing and also notices the pieces of the moon that Wallace had cut, using glue to reattach them back. When the robot turns its back, it notices Wallace's rocket and writes up a parking ticket. The robot also notices a leak and pulls out a telescope, with Wallace right in front of it while he continues tasting more of the moon. The robot prepares to club Wallace while Gromit tries hard not to doze off before he notices the robot almost strike Wallace until the money that Wallace inserted into the robot runs out just in the nick of time. But then as Wallace gets up, he hits his head on the club as he takes it out of the robot's hand and inserts another coin before he and Gromit head back to their rocket. Realizing that the rocket is heading back to Earth, the robot eagerly follows after the pair to pursue its dream of becoming a professional skier. Wallace spots the robot and at first believes that it's after their moon cheese, I guess, he didn't seem to love it before, and quickly climbs up the ladder with the robot struggling behind. The robot tries to sneak on board, using a can opener to open the fuselage. But after successfully making it onto the rocket, it lights a match to be able to see in the dark, accidentally igniting fuel after Wallace realized that Gromit forgot to light the fuse. The robot can't hold on as the rocket takes off, feeling sad over his crushed dream, but uses pieces of the rocket fuselage to make its own skis and poles as it waves goodbye to Wallace and Gromit, watching from the rocket. Number 2. The Wrong Trousers. First of all, I have to say that Wallace and Gromit's house is super cool. Wallace pages Gromit to get him out of bed as the bed lifts and Wallace slides down a trapdoor, with his clothes hanging perfectly under an opening in the ceiling, with Wallace landing perfectly at his chair at the breakfast table, with robots and machines to put his shirt on for him. Honestly, if I lived like this, I'd want to get out of bed this way every morning too. They've even got contraptions that can put jam on their toast. And what about at the end of the day before bed? How does that work? At the beginning of this film, Gromit fetches the mail, all of which are bills with the exception of a musical birthday card for Gromit. During breakfast, Wallace has a look at the bills while Gromit plays the birthday card, but Wallace is mostly concerned about their finances. Then how do they afford all of those machines around their house? Wallace has very little in his piggy bank, adding, "And those presents weren't cheap either," getting Gromit's attention as he reads the newspaper as their little toy train, again, how can they afford all of this, passes by with Gromit's birthday present, a new leash and collar. Gromit seems unimpressed at first, and that collar does look a bit threatening, but then Wallace adds that there's more. At first, Gromit appears frightened by this surprise until he reads the card, "To Gromit, Love Wallace." Wallace opens the present for Gromit, a pair of techno trousers, a robotic walking system for Gromit. Wallace attaches the leash to the trousers and programs it to walk a very reluctant Gromit. Wallace can't walk him himself? In the middle of the walk, Gromit escapes and attaches a toy dog on wheels to the leash. Not that that robot will even notice. While Gromit has his own birthday fun at the playground, Wallace struggles to figure out how to pay off his debt, with Gromit later returning with the robotic pants at the end of the walk time that Wallace had set. In order to make the payments, Wallace decides to rent a room in the house, with the only person answering being a penguin. Right away, this upsets Gromit as the penguin makes himself very comfortable in Gromit's room. Wallace tries to set him up with another room, but after a picture on the wall falls down, the penguin isn't interested. After pretty much taking over Gromit's room, Wallace redecorates the other room that he offered the penguin with the same wallpaper as Gromit's, who uses the techno trousers himself and finds himself being able to walk on the walls and ceilings, making it easy for him to help with redecorating. However, Gromit has a really hard time falling asleep with the penguin playing music all night. After moving to the couch and not having much better luck there, Gromit angrily pounds on the penguin's room door, or really his room door, but the music is so loud that he can't hear him. Gromit tries to sleep outside in his doghouse with his ears covered, but with the lights on and the music still playing loudly, he still can't sleep. Just then, the penguin mysteriously takes off, with the music still playing and the lights in the room somehow shutting off immediately after. The next morning, the penguin takes over Gromit's job of helping Wallace get dressed, bringing him his slippers and the newspaper while Gromit waits for it. The more the penguin helps Wallace around the house, the more agitated Gromit gets, with Wallace even sharing dinner with the penguin, making Gromit feel left out. The wallpaper in Gromit's doghouse even matches his room. They didn't need to redecorate the other room. With the penguin now having completely taken over Gromit's life, Gromit packs up and runs away from home in the pouring rain, pleasing the penguin as he watches from the window, making his own plans for the techno trousers. I remember watching this when I was a kid, and I remember feeling so bad for Gromit. And now as an adult watching it, that scene where Gromit looks at the picture of him and Wallace, I kinda wanted to cry with him. Gromit takes shelter in an alley the next morning, waking up in a garbage can, while back at the house, Wallace wakes up his traditional way, but lands in the techno trousers. At first he thinks that Gromit has done something when the trousers start walking him outside. Meanwhile, Gromit tries to find a new home, but can't find any place that allows dogs. But as he keeps looking, he comes across a wanted poster offering a 1,000-pound reward, as it is in the UK, for a chicken who very much resembles the penguin. As the techno trousers continue to go out of control, Wallace comes across Gromit, unaware that the penguin is the one who rigged the trousers. While Wallace continues to plead for help, Gromit notices the penguin controlling Wallace. Finally, Wallace arrives back home and the trousers walk him to bed for a nap. Why do they look different? They look a bit more like actual trousers than they did. Gromit still finds the penguin to be suspicious as he continues following him. He discovers the penguin scaling a building and heads back to the house to discover that the penguin has also replaced Gromit's room wallpaper with a wallpaper of fish and comes across plans to steal a diamond just as the penguin returns wearing a rubber glove in disguise as a chicken, uncanny to the picture on the wanted poster. While Wallace is asleep, the penguin uses the techno trousers to walk Wallace out of the house, with the pressure of his footsteps activating Gromit's bed with the same contraption that Wallace has in his room, with Gromit landing in Wallace's chair at the table, and the machines putting on his clothing for him, albeit backwards. Although with no bread in the toaster, the jam hits Gromit in the face. The penguin takes a still sleeping Wallace to the very building he was scaling before, using the techno trousers to climb the outside walls. It's amazing how Wallace, for one thing, never once falls out of the techno trousers, and that he's able to still stay asleep through all the noise. After making it through the air vent, Wallace arrives in a museum while the Penguin watches his plan unfold from the window as Wallace gets closer to the diamond. But before he can make it, the Penguin notices laser beams meant to set off a burglar alarm, stopping Wallace before he activates it. Luckily, Wallace stretches, avoiding the lasers as the Penguin continues to control him. Upon making it to the diamond, the Penguin releases a grappling hook inside of a helmet that he placed on Wallace's head, but the grappling hook misses the diamond, finally getting it on the last try, but it slips away. The Penguin manages to catch it, but while trying to bring it to him, a ceiling tile becomes loose with Wallace walking on it as the grappling hook, dangling from Wallace's helmet with the diamond still in place, sets off the alarm, waking up Wallace, who becomes trapped while the Penguin tries to retrieve him. Wallace does manage to escape once the Penguin controls the techno-trousers to the direction of the window, which switches Wallace outside as the Penguin takes the diamond, bringing Wallace back to the ground. The Penguin and Wallace return home as he takes off his rubber glove, much to Wallace's shock. The Penguin traps Wallace in his wardrobe and tries to escape with the diamond, but Gromit meets him at the door with a rolling pin ready to fight. However, the Penguin was ready for that as he pulls a gun on Gromit. God, this is getting really dark. After the Penguin locks Gromit in the wardrobe with Wallace, he fixes the techno-trousers to lift the wardrobe up. As the Penguin tries to escape, the wardrobe crashes into the doorframe, releasing Gromit as he chases the Penguin on their model train set. The Penguin almost escapes out the door, made especially for him, kind of like a dog door, but it's in the shape of the Penguin. But Wallace switches the track to go the other way just as Wallace breaks free of the wardrobe, stepping on the end of the train set. But then the Penguin shoots at the switch, separating that one car from the rest of the set. But it only catches up to the Penguin much quicker as Wallace takes the gun from him before Wallace crashes through the open window to Gromit's room, finally freeing him from the techno-trousers as he lands at the back of the train set again. Gromit manages to catch up with the Penguin, who releases his front car from the rest of the train set before Gromit can catch him, causing Wallace and Gromit to go the opposite direction, heading right for the window. Conveniently, Gromit finds extra pieces of track, very quickly adding more to avoid crashing. As the chase continues, the trousers get in the way and send the Penguin flying, just as Wallace and Gromit crash into the kitchen cupboard, with Gromit capturing the Penguin in a milk bottle and retrieving the diamond. Using the techno-trousers, Wallace and Gromit bring the Penguin to the police, and the Penguin is imprisoned in the zoo, with Gromit returning home to help out Wallace, and the pair use the reward money to pay off their debt and throw out the trousers as they walk into the sunset. The Penguin, whose name we learn is Feathers McGraw as it says on Gromit's newspaper, actually returns in the recently released Wallace and Gromit movie Vengeance Most Fowl, which I still haven't seen yet, so please don't spoil it for me. Number 3. A Close Shave. Man, the openings of these films always look so ominous. While Gromit is knitting in bed, a truck drives by shaking their house, with a small sheep breaking free once the truck comes to a red light, making its way to Wallace and Gromit's window cleaning service, much to the annoyance of the driver's sinister-looking dog. So, did Gromit get his room back from Feathers, or is this still the one that he had after Feathers took his over? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Carrying on. So at breakfast, after Wallace's traditional get up and get dressed routine, their breakfast machine continues squirting porridge at Wallace's face, covering him entirely as Gromit turns it off, discovering that the wires seem to have been eaten. While the pair wonder what could have caused this, the door quietly creaks a bit. Wallace decides to make his own porridge as Gromit discovers a bite out of their plant, and Wallace discovers that someone has taken a bite out of their porridge box and out of Wallace's cheese. At first, Wallace assumes that it's Gromit as the sheep sneaks behind him, taking the entire plant, but accidentally dropping one of the leaves. Gromit investigates further while Wallace reads his newspaper, which also has a bite taken out of it. Little does he know that he is using the sheep as a footrest. Just then, he gets a call from a woman requesting his and Gromit's service cleaning their windows. Gromit throws a switch, and in a similar way to how Wallace gets ready in the morning, the pair head off to work, washing windows for a wool shop. When they arrive, Gromit comes face to face with the dog from before, who glares at Gromit and walks away. As Gromit begins working, Wallace falls for the shopkeeper, with Gromit blocking his view by washing the window Wallace is looking through. Wallace goes inside to meet the shopkeeper. After accidentally making a mess with the balls of yarn, the shopkeeper introduces her dog Preston to Wallace. Preston seems just as smart as Gromit reading the newspaper. Wallace and the shopkeeper's hands accidentally touch while cleaning up the mess as she introduces herself as Wendeline Ramsbottom. Anyone else thinking about Despicable Me right now? As they're getting to know each other, Preston steals Gromit's window washing equipment from him as Gromit continues dangling from up top. Wallace points out Preston's newspaper's front page reporting on incidents of sheep rustling, as Wendeline points out that Gromit appears impatient with Wallace after finishing up. Wendeline compliments Wallace on what a great job they did, really that Gromit did, with the windows, as Wallace, clearly smitten with Wendeline, crashes into the door and Preston heads to Wallace and Gromit's, noticing wool on Gromit's dog door as the pair return home, with almost everything in their house appearing to have been destroyed. After hearing a noise, Gromit discovers the sheep in the kitchen, with Wallace finding him immediately after. While Gromit isn't too pleased with the sheep's presence, Wallace takes a liking to him, cleaning him up in his knit-o-matic while Preston spies on him. The knit-o-matic freshens the sheep up, even giving him a little shave, with the wool being used to make a small sweater that will only fit on Wallace's head. Wallace decides to name the sheep Shaun. This was the debut of Shaun the Sheep, who later would go on to star in his own short-form television series and a series of feature films. After finishing, Gromit hears some kind of creaking noise, but brushes it off as Preston sneaks into the basement, reading the blueprints and plans for Wallace's knit-o-matic and leaving with them. Back home, while Gromit reads the newspaper, and I believe that the front headline probably has to do with Preston, Shaun continues to get underfoot, eating everything in sight. The next day, Wallace and Gromit have a job cleaning a clock, which I can assume is Big Ben, as Wallace takes off to see Wendeline again. While Preston watches from the window, Shaun takes off himself, peering out of a hole in the brick wall while Gromit carries on working, leading to Gromit poking in himself. It looks kind of like at the carnival when you can stand behind a picture of a headless body and poke your head into it instead. But then a camera flashes, and I can assume by the ominous music that some kind of trouble is on the way. Gromit finds Shaun in the back of a truck, and when trying to rescue him, he frees a whole flock of sheep into Wendeline's shop, carrying Wallace out. Once the truck is empty, Gromit finds Shaun tied to the inside of the truck, but when he releases him, Preston, in the driver's seat, closes the hatch, trapping Gromit inside as Shaun successfully escapes while Gromit is arrested, with the picture that was taken of him meant to frame him for sheep rustling. The flock of sheep that Gromit freed takes his place at home, but gets too much in Wallace's way when Wendeline comes to the door, tearfully asking that Wallace forget about her. Every newspaper Wallace reads has more stories about Gromit, now in prison. Just noticing behind him, Feathers was here, and from the new movie, we know where he is now. Gromit is given a 5,000-piece puzzle, and upon completing it, a message reads, "Friday night, 8 p.m., be ready, a friend." Instantly, Gromit realizes that it is currently Friday and the time is 8 p.m., with Shaun freeing Gromit with the help from Wallace and the rest of the flock, until Wallace slips on a bar of soap. Now on the run from the law, Wendeline suddenly appears with Preston in a field to round up the sheep, with Shaun too anxious to join as Preston closes in on him. Wendeline tries to stop Preston and reveals that they really are behind the whole sheep rustling operation, but she now wants out, much to Preston's annoyance, as he locks Wendeline in the back of the truck with the rest of the sheep. While Wallace and Gromit watch over, Wendeline cries, "You're not going to turn me into dog meat!" Finding this very suspicious, Wallace and Gromit follow Preston in pursuit. But the tables turn when Preston hides the truck and follows Wallace and Gromit instead. As the truck closes in on the pair, Gromit uses his ladder to reach a telephone wire, launching him and Wallace out of Preston's sight. But as they continue chasing him, Wallace's motorcycle detaches from Gromit's sidecart as Gromit falls off of a cliff. Luckily, Gromit's cart can transform into an airplane, again, how convenient, and Wallace makes it to the back of Preston's truck, attempting to rescue Wendeline, finally reaching the switch to open the back, with Wallace holding on as the sheep use Wallace's back like a bridge to escape while the truck and motorcycle are still driving. However, Preston slows the truck down, and unable to stop, the sheep and Wallace land in the back of the truck just as Gromit shows up squirting porridge at the truck, not even giving up when Preston closes the window, ultimately distracting Gromit from nearly crashing into the clock from before. Gromit successfully avoids it by flying upwards, and Preston arrives at the wool shop. Preston brings the sheep, Wallace, and Wendeline in, and Wallace discovers that Preston built his own knit-o-matic as he uses the machine on them. Luckily, Shaun managed to escape and attempts to get Gromit's attention. Upon arrival, Gromit once again squirts porridge at Preston, who stops him before he can get any closer, but Shaun moves the, I want to say vacuum, I'm thinking of that line in Elf, ooh, sucky, you know, the one when he's in the mailroom. Anyway, Shaun successfully traps Preston in the knit-o-matic. Just as the machine starts to completely shave Preston, crashing is heard from inside, with Wendeline admitting to Wallace that Preston is really a cyber dog, and he's now starting to malfunction. Preston comes out of the machine now in full robot form, closing in on Shaun before Gromit rescues him, and his fake fur knits a very large sweater that covers his whole head. But he can't see where he is going, and accidentally releases a switch that raises everyone to a mincing machine. Gromit gets everyone out of the way as he and Preston get even closer to the mincer, while Wallace tries to shut it down, but it only pushes him, Wendelene, and the sheep onto a conveyor belt leading to the machine. While trying to escape death, Sean saves the day by pushing Preston into the mincer, ultimately jamming and reversing it, defeating Preston and freeing Wallace, Wendelene, and the flock of sheep. Wendelene visits Wallace and Gromit while Preston is rebuilt and reformed, although still appearing to be injured. Wallace invites Wendelene in for some cheese, but she passes and takes off. Feeling sad, Wallace quickly gets over it when he decides to have some cheese himself, only to discover that Sean has eaten all of it. Number 4. A Matter of Loaf and Death. After a close shave was when the feature film Curse of the Were-Rabbit came out and was followed by another short some years later. This time around, Wallace and Gromit run their own bakery and have a new wake-up system. Gromit fills a balloon with water and attaches it to a windmill, with it landing on Wallace's face. Yeah, that'll definitely wake him up. And they still keep the system where Gromit uses a switch to lift Wallace's bed and land perfectly into his pants, this time on a conveyor belt with bags of flour. They must get a lot of business if Wallace can afford to do this. The pair begin making deliveries while Wallace learns from the newspaper about a string of murders involving bakers. Side note, how is Gromit able to drive? Man, this is a smart dog. While on their delivery run, Wallace seems to somehow switch positions with Gromit and almost hits a woman on a bike with her poodle in the basket going downhill due to her brakes not working. Wallace pushes the wheel to Gromit, okay, but still, how is that possible? While he goes to help, with him jumping in front of the bike and Gromit throwing tea cakes for Wallace to stop the bike with, only to crash into the zoo, nearly landing into the crocodile pit before Wallace's foot hangs onto the ledge, rescuing the woman and her dog before the crocodiles get them first. Upon their rescue, Gromit discovers that the brakes appear to be working just fine, and the woman introduces herself as Paella Bakewell and her dog Fluffles. Wallace recognized Paella earlier as the model for the Bako Light bread company in their universe. The pair get to know each other, and after Paella takes off, Wallace once again falls head over heels for her, with Gromit liking Fluffles. At work, Wallace makes a sculpture of Paella's head out of dough right when she visits with Fluffles, inviting Wallace and Gromit to join them on a walk. Paella claims that Fluffles was eager to invite Wallace and Gromit, and after Paella gives Fluffles a nudge with her foot, Fluffles goes to Wallace for attention. And right away, I know that something's up. Wallace takes Paella up on her offer, leaving Gromit in charge of the bakery, while he and Paella head to the park. Through a montage, we see Wallace and Paella continuing their relationship, even seeming to spoof the movie Ghost, while Gromit continues to hold down the fort at the bakery and handle deliveries on his own. But when he gets home, he notices his dog toys in the trash can, with Paella hanging her jacket on Gromit's coat hanger — this dog is a coat hanger — and finds that she has redecorated almost the entire house. This infuriates Gromit as he heads to his own room to have a moment, noticing that that has also been redecorated. As Gromit starts to get really angry, Fluffles shows up to return his belongings, visibly shaken but smiling at Gromit before Paella calls for them to take off. After she leaves, Wallace discovers that she left her purse behind as he and Gromit head to Paella's, looks like a mansion, for Gromit to return it. However, when Gromit knocks on the door, he realizes that it is left open. Gromit makes his way inside and discovers mannequins with chef hats and aprons, 12 to be exact, with a 13th prepared as Gromit comes across a scrapbook containing 12 pictures of Paella with chefs and one of her with Wallace with a number 13 underneath, making Gromit realize that Paella is the one responsible for the murders of bakers and Wallace is her next victim, knocking down all of the mannequins from shock as Paella makes her way upstairs. However, Gromit has escaped and cleaned up the mess. Fluffles, however, can tell that Gromit is still there as he hangs from the chandelier as Paella goes to sleep. Gromit remains hanging from the chandelier all night, but wakes up and falls onto Paella's bed after she had already left. Gromit quickly grabs Paella's scrapbook and heads back home to warn Wallace. But before he can warn him, Paella has already beaten him to the house, revealing to him that she and Wallace are engaged. However, she notices that Gromit has her scrapbook and distracts him by kissing him and taking the book from him, throwing it into the fireplace. Because Gromit doesn't speak, and in order to find evidence of Paella's plan, Gromit installs security measures around the house, setting off an alarm as soon as Paella walks in, with Gromit going as far as to check Paella's basket. However, the closest thing she has to a weapon is a ladle for soup. But Wallace discovers that Gromit has also taken out all of the silverware or anything close to it, also checking Paella's soup before Wallace can eat it. I would have gotten Paella to eat it first. Paella manages to get Gromit away from the soup, acting all fake and playful with him while Fluffles watches. Suddenly, Paella bites her arm and lies to Wallace that it was Gromit. Wallace is surprised by this, and Paella chains Gromit to a muzzle while Wallace leaves Gromit behind to wash dishes, as he and Paella head upstairs, with Paella pretending to have dropped her heel into the grinder, and Gromit notices Paella about to push him in. Gromit tries to reach the key to his chain, but Paella is suddenly hit by a bag of flour just as Wallace manages to reach the heel. Wallace goes to help Paella, who then reveals her true colors to Wallace and leaves with Fluffles, throwing her engagement ring back at Wallace. I love when Gromit brings Wallace's tea, and Wallace is just heartbroken over the breakup, thinking about Paella's comments on Wallace being a fruitcake. Unsure of how to handle that, Gromit slightly grins and pats Wallace on the shoulder. Wallace is like, "I'm not a fruitcake, am I?" And Gromit's like, there, kind of awkwardly. Just then, Paella returns and apologizes for her outburst, bringing Wallace a cake. Although Wallace seems somewhat surprised to see Paella. However, she only just drops it off as she heads out, claiming that Fluffles is sick. Gromit goes to Paella's and thinks he overhears Fluffles shaking scared under a blanket, but it turns out to be one of those cymbal-banging monkey toys. It must be like in Toy Story 3 where the monkey keeps watch over anything suspicious. Maybe this is where the writers for Toy Story 3 got that idea. Just then, Paella captures Gromit, revealing that she actually delivered a bomb to Wallace disguised as a cake just as Wallace prepares it, unaware that Gromit is taken off. Paella imprisons Gromit in a storeroom with Fluffles, but the pair escape on a hot air balloon. Again, plot convenient. Gromit makes it back to the house just as Wallace lights the candle on the cake, unaware that it is actually a fuse, attempting to put it out with a vase full of flowers, splashing it on Wallace's face as the fuse keeps going no matter how many times Gromit tries to put it out. Gromit runs off with the cake, and Wallace jumps after him, with the cake falling out of Gromit's hand and a bomb coming out of it. This makes Wallace realize that Paella is in fact the murderer of all the bakers, as she arrives with Fluffles, who manages to bite Paella's hand, freeing her as Gromit grabs the bomb, but can't find any place to throw it. Paella hits Gromit with a peel, releasing the bomb outside but trapping Gromit into the mixer just as Paella closes in on Wallace, revealing that after she gained weight, she was fired from being spokesmodel for Bakelite, vowing revenge on all bakers. But before she can attack Wallace, Fluffles saves the day by attacking Paella using a forklift. However, she accidentally knocks Wallace out of the house as he lands on the windmill, with the bomb on the other side. After it makes it to the top, Wallace breaks free and lands on his bed, although his pants are still on the windmill, but the bomb lands not too long after, and Fluffles accidentally sets off their get-up contraption. But what Wallace doesn't know is that the bomb landed in his pants, I guess he had a new pair ready for him as usual, as Paella escapes using the hot air balloon. The bomb only causes Wallace to run around panicking, but Gromit uses that vacuum-like device and has Fluffles reverse it so that Wallace's pants fill up with dough as the bomb explodes. Does anyone think that Wallace's pants full of dough look like the techno trousers? Paella vows revenge as she floats away in the balloon, but Wallace warns her that it won't hold her for much longer as she lands in the crocodile pit. Gromit and Fluffles share a moment together as Fluffles nearly tears up and leaves. With both Paella and Fluffles gone, Wallace and Gromit head out on another run of bread deliveries, passing by Fluffles as the pair invite her to tag along. Okay, there we go, all 4 Wallace and Gromit short films. Come to think of it, with their dark tone and theme of mystery, I probably could have done these around Halloween. For the most part, they all involve the pair getting into some kind of situation that's kind of like the last thing you expect, like in classic mystery stories. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about Wallace and Gromit. I hope you enjoyed listening, and if you've seen the new movie Vengeance Most Fowl on Netflix, I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.